Hi, this is Michelle Morgan. Welcome to the Mind Right Game Type segment. Today's guest is Scott Cvetkovski. He's the
Hi.
founder of Sports Leadership, Positive Sports Leadership. Scott has been involved in business, leadership, and education his entire life. His love for leadership and business led him to achieve a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, concentrations in economics and marketing, and a Master of Science in Executive Leadership and Change, where he developed a sports leadership guide for athletic captains and aspiring leaders in the world of athletics. This leadership guide acts as a resource for captains to learn from and referred to as they take on the role of a leader on their respective teams. Scott's love of leadership and helping others inspired him to develop presentations and workshops to continue to be a positive influence to those who wish to lead their programs and people to success. With this knowledge, Scott recognized the need for emotional intelligence inside the athletic world, corporate world, and education sector, and became a certified emotional intelligence coach to create another crucial workshop and assessment to help others achieve greatness within their organizations. So thank you, Scott. Welcome to our show. How did I do with your last name?
That was good. That was great. I would put you in the top 5% of those who get it right.
Woo! Already starting off the interview, great then.
Yeah.
So you're doing a lot of great things within the world of sports and for student athletes as well. So can you give us a little bit of your background as a student athlete, what sport you played and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up in a karate school, and that was my first introduction to athletics. So my father owned a karate school, and essentially, as the story goes, I came out of the womb doing a side flying kick. So I grew up, in athletics right away, and I had two older brothers, and both played soccer. So what does the younger brother want to do? He wants to play soccer too, and so I started playing soccer at the age of 3. And so, the martial arts and soccer were my two core things. And then as I kept getting older and older, I kept finding myself in more leadership roles on the club team I was playing on, and then eventually playing premier clubs, which then eventually led me to playing collegiate soccer, which was just the most amazing experience. And, I had offers from D1 schools, D2, D3. I knew I wanted to stay close to home, and I ended up falling in love with a losing program, actually. I came on campus, I met the team, I met the coach, and I fell in love with this program, and I knew I could be an influence on it. And so by my sophomore year, I was given a captain's band and taken on this role as a leader in a losing program. And eventually through development with the coaches, with myself, with other co-captains, we became a playoff team in the school's first playoff team in history, which was amazing.
Wow.
So and then so that whole process of personal development, team development, individual development with my teammates, I just fell in love with it. I started teaching the martial arts and coaching soccer when I was 15, so I already understood that process of development, wanted to create it even more, so I went and got that executive leadership and change master's degree, which was just an unbelievable experience. I mean, the first 8 months to a year is emotional boot camp. I mean, you're breaking yourself down through assessments and assessment over and over again, because you personally have to go through that development process so you can help others, so you know what it's like. And so it was really incredible. And then that second year was really just helping understand how do you help that individual through that own process. And that's where the first version of the sports leadership guide was developed, and I just knew I wanted to help athletes through this process of development and become better on and off the field, because athletics can do such great things for an individual, and a lot of the times they don't take what they can do as an athlete and transfer it into other things in their lives to be better in a holistic view. And so that's kind of my journey to where I am today, working with collegiate programs, high school programs, producing leadership material for everyone who needs it.
Awesome. So even when you speak about you said you wanted to go to a college that was like a losing program, and then you kind of brought your leadership skills there. And so when I go over your website and I, read everything on there, one of the words that stand out is emotional intelligence. So is that like a key component to kind of changing, the mindset of the program? And so I want to know, what does emotional intelligence stand for? What does that really mean, and what does it consist of?
Yeah, so emotional intelligence essentially is the social and emotional skills that we perceive for ourselves and express to the world around us. It's how we develop and maintain mutually beneficial relationships, not just one-sided, mutually, keyword there. It's how we make decisions every single day, and it's how we handle our stress. And so these key components, so I'm certified in what's called the EQI 2.0, which is considered the most accurate measurement of emotional intelligence. And so each part and component of emotional intelligence has all these subscales under it. So when you talk about leadership development, everything we do has an emotional aspect to it, whether we realize it or not. And so when you understand your emotional intelligence, essentially what you're doing is you're taking that emotional information that you're getting in real time and using it to make effective decisions. And sports is one of the most emotional things, I think, that you can do. You know what I mean? Especially when you're going through high school and college. You know, it's such an emotional sport, and there's so many different kinds of emotions that are involved with it. And there's so many other key aspects because you have so many different personalities and people cope in different ways. And so different emotions come out. And so for me, you know, emotional intelligence became a common thread because when you're a leader and you're developing people and you're trying to understand what's going on in a situation, you have to tap into yourself and you have to tap into that other person. And so like, you know, like empathy is a part of emotional intelligence, which is a really important part of leadership and development. And so being able to understand that other side of you, you know, when you're talking to a teammate or when you're delivering something and how people are going to interpret it and take it. So for me, you know, being in business, because I worked at a marketing firm while I was also playing collegiate sports, and I saw this common thread because anytime you get a group of people together, there's going to be emotion, you know, and you got a lot of different emotions going on. So it's so beneficial to be able to do that emotional check-in and just have that extra awareness to go, okay, what am I feeling right now in this exact moment as things are being said to me, and being able to control and make an effective decision off of that is super important, especially in a high emotional activities such as collegiate sports.
Right. And then how does someone determine what their emotional intelligence is? Like, is there an assessment? You know, how do you find out, how do I even know what my emotional intelligence is?
Yeah, so you can take the and there's a couple emotional intelligence assessments out there. Again, I got certified in the EQI 2.0 through Multi Health Systems, which is a level B instrument, which means when it was created right along the same guidelines as the American Psychological Association, and they have the largest norm base for creating an assessment, and so they're considered the most accurate. So what you would do is you would take this great online assessment. It takes like 20 minutes. And they have a bunch of different ones. So depending on what age you are or where you are in life, you could take the emotional intelligence in higher education or a workplace report or a leadership report, which I use. And essentially we would then take a look at, you would get your scores for the main composites, which there's 5 main composites of emotional intelligence. And then there's subscales. There's 3 subscales under each of those. So you get 15 subscales. So each subscale gets its own page, and it talks about what does your score mean? What are the implications behaviorally, socially of your score? Here's some strategies to develop better in it. Here's some things to be aware of. And hey, like you might be out of balance. This score is a little high, which is off balance with this score over here. So it becomes this incredible tool and report. And then, you know, you would use someone like myself as a coach to walk you through that. And then essentially at the end of it, we would create an emotional plan of action. You know, how do you, you know, because that's one of the great things about emotional intelligence is it can be developed. You know, so every time I take an emotional intelligence assessment, it should be different, you know, unlike IQ, which is a little more set. Even personality type indicators are a little more set, you know, like I'll always be an extrovert, but that doesn't mean that I can't show my introvert side and listen. But my main preference is, and so that's what's great about emotional intelligence is you can develop it. You can develop the key areas you need to become successful in whatever you're doing.
And then when say if I'm a student athlete and I take the assessment, and then I see, you know, where I'm at in these different sectors. And then I have a coach who kind of assesses me. Now, is this something I'm doing through my sports? Like I'm in a game or I'm being in practice. Is it best for me to be recorded so that we can go back and, you know, like, okay, see in this situation, you know, this is where this component matches up to this, and how would we handle this situation differently? Is that kind of how it would work?
Yeah, definitely. What we would do is we would take a look at certain parts of the emotional intelligence, and then we would say, okay, here's some of the things you need to do from an action standpoint to develop and strengthen it. because it might be a little weaker. You're finding yourself in situations on the field where you can avoid if you do something different. And so what I tell people to do a lot is to go old school, pick up a diary. And there's a lot of times where, depending on what subscale it is, it's like, okay, think about your day. When did you, if we're talking about stress tolerance, when did you, go off the handle today? What was the situation? What were the trigger points? Okay, when we hear these then trigger points or see them coming up as we start to get more emotionally aware, we can then take a step back, take a breath, say, okay, something's hitting my trigger point right now. I need to slow down before I react to this and be proactive in my approach instead of reacting to whatever's happening.
And that's just another key component of life in general, right? Like having to write things down, because so many times we think, we see the situation happen through our eyes and we think, okay, I know what I can do better next time. But it's actually processing those things and writing it down so we actually have the words to look at, and we're watching it as we write, kind of, visualizing it again and saying, yeah, I saw things differently. The way I see it and the way I write it sometimes are two different things, because that's why books are so important, because the details are so much greater, which is, I think, why people say, oh, the book's so much better than the movie. And it's because the book has way more descriptions and details, so you get more involved and into it. So I think that's really great. And like you mentioned, it's not just for student athletes. There's other sectors that this emotional intelligence assessment can be beneficial and useful for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very big in the corporate world. It's very big in like leadership succession when they're looking for leaders of big organizations. It's big with like human resources departments that are using it as a recruiting tool, which is really cool. And then when you talk about, you could do like the 360s. So when you're talking about maybe a department or a team, using the assessments for those and just development of, any organization is super beneficial.
And so for recommendation for like coaches and programs, how often do you like recommend for someone to take the emotional intelligence assessment to see like where I'm at, where I'm developing? How often should that be done?
Every 6 months. Every 6 months is a good standpoint. You really shouldn't take it any earlier than that. That'll give you enough time to go through the development process, make habits out of what we've talked about, what we've developed, what we set in your emotional plan of action. Then we can take it again and see, did it strengthen? Did it not strengthen? Oh, maybe we focused so much on here, we kind of lost a little bit over here. So let's talk about that, balancing it out. So every 6 months is a good way to do it.
Awesome. That sounds like an interesting tool assessment to take to kind of find out where we're at emotionally. So in the intro, I mentioned you wrote the Sports Leadership Guide, which you just recently published, which I actually purchased my copy last night. So I'm looking forward
thank
to
you.
reading that. So can you share the importance of this guide and why it's important for student athletes everywhere to have access to it?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the main things that I think a lot of leadership people teach, and I'm such a component of, is how genuine you have to be in putting others before yourself. And I went through my athletic journey with that in mind, and it brought me to some amazing situations where I was able to learn whether I did the right thing or the wrong thing. I was able to learn from. And so in my guide, what we do is we talk about traditional leadership theories, because a lot of times these student athletes don't really have a base of understanding what leadership is. They hear this word, they know it's the main guy, it's the guy we're supposed to look to, but they don't really understand that there's so many different kinds of leadership, and that you have to be able to call upon different types of leadership depending on your situation, whether it's situational leadership, transformational leadership, servant leadership. There's all these different kinds. And so, it's really important. I start off with the guide talking about just the base of leadership. Let's get you an understanding of what leadership is, how you're supposed to, act, what it actually means, so they can understand their role a little bit better. And then we talk about that emotional intelligence aspect that we talked about. And then what we really do is we really get down into the nitty-gritty of what being a student athlete is, which is essentially, how do I operate on the field? How do I operate with my teammates? How do I operate with my teachers? You're a leader in your entire school when you're a leader on the team. How are you acting in the lunchroom? How are you acting when you're passing in the hallway? How are you supposed to have a conversation with someone you don't know who just came up to you after a big loss the night before And how are you supposed to communicate them when they say, hey, why are you guys losing? What's going on? Well, okay, well, our defense and our goalie blew it. That's not the right thing. So getting down to even that much detail about how do I handle a situation where I'm on a campus, I have fans, people are coming to cheer us on, and we're blowing it. How do I communicate that things are going to get better? How do I communicate that I'm going to be able, to bring our team? How am I going to be able to not throw my players under the bus and keep encouraging them and be a confidence builder for them? And so, we hit a lot of things like that. We talk a lot about conflict. We talk about Tuckman's model for development of small teams, which is like the forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning, that's all in there. And it's really, I just took everything I've learned, everything I've studied, everything I've been through, and I've taken the best and compiled it into this guide. And so it's a tool, and they can have it in their pocket where they can literally have an experience and say, I don't know what to do, and pick up the guide and say, okay, go to this chapter. Okay, what does Scott say? Like, what's the advice here? And then, I always say when I do, interviews, podcasts, I'm like, if they pick up my book and they don't find it in there, my email address is in there, and they better email me and ask me a question.
Got it. So full access to Scott when you pick up his book. So you have your coach at your fingertips. Just when you were talking about that, it's something that I can relate to, because I remember as a student athlete, like one of the things I did not like was losing. So after a game, it's like, especially if it's one of those tough losses, it's like, I don't want to talk to anybody right now. Yep. But like you said, we have people that come and cheer us on who are there to support us. Yep. And, I had to come to realize, I couldn't just keep a wall up, because they're like, you guys did good, or it wasn't, that's not like, why are you guys losing? It's more like, you played well, blah, blah, blah. And you're kind of like, I don't want to hear it. But that's also part of being a leader as well, because we have to be able to, handle those situations and moments as well. And then another thing you touched on, which I was going to, because sometimes we think of leaders as they're the best player on the team, or maybe they're most vocal people on the team. What are the importance of those people who think like, I don't want to be the captain and I don't really talk. That's just not in my personality. Like, is this book still for them as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because, we talk about that in the book as well. And we talk about, vocalization and the effect on, the social culture of the team. And so my experience was actually really phenomenal, because when I was in college, I was the vocal leader. I was the guy that had to be the bad guy sometimes, but they knew, because they trusted me, because leadership, trust is beyond important. And we talk about that all the time in the book. I had then a co-captain who led by example and was a quieter guy. So we talk about that as well when we talk about having captains and co-captains, and who's going to be the vocal leader and who's going to be the leader by example. And those are things that you have to discuss, and probably are very rarely discussed between co-captains. So it's a combination. I would never ask my players to do something I wouldn't do. I was always the first one picking up the cones. I was always the first and last one at practice. Absolutely 100%. And I was the vocal guy. My buddy James, he was, and Russell, they were the lead by examples and kind of the mediators when I would have to tell a teammate or the entire team something that they didn't want to hear, which is part of being a leader. Sometimes you got to tell it like it is. And that's why there's a whole section of the book that talks about communicating, how you communicate to the entire team, how do you communicate to individuals, and then how do you communicate entire team goals and things like that. So.
And now, is this a book for coaches as well, not just because they're leaders as well? So is this something that they can benefit from?
I absolutely think so. I mean, the emotional intelligence, it goes both ways, and there's been studies between at the Olympic level that multi-health systems did, between the coaches and the players, and how important it is for each party to understand their emotional intelligence. The leadership theories are in there. They're concrete. It's something they can use and learn. Understanding Tuckman's model for small development in teams, and how you move in and out. How do you move from the forming stage? What are the players like in this stage? Usually they're really excited. They're ready to go. They're unsure of kind of who's in charge yet. How do you move out of that stage and go like that? Like when I was in college, we had a big whiteboard in our locker room, and I drew out Tuckman's model. And every single day we would put down, where are we today? Are we still in the forming stage? Are we stuck in the storming stage? Are we arguing? Are we in the performing stage? Did we drop back to the storming stage? So these type of things can be used by coaches and by student athletes. Some of the things are catered specifically more towards student athletes because that's kind of who I was thinking about when I was writing it. But everything in there is completely applicable to the coaches as well.
Awesome. And even when you were speaking about leaderships, like you had yourself, you were the captain, you had a co-captain as well, and you were the more vocal and they were more lead by example. It also made me think of, everyone has their role on the team, and sometimes there's people on the team who don't get to play or they don't play a lot. And so maybe their leadership role is the one who encourages people, or they start like the chant of defense if you're playing basketball, whatever it is, like they have that leadership role. Because that really does form the camaraderie and the mindset to keep the team motivated and winning and be positive.
100%. And I'll give you the best example. We had a guy on our team, and if he sees this, he'll know who he is, and I love him to death. I won't tell his name, but we essentially kept him on the team. He wasn't in the best shape, didn't play a lot, and any other program probably would have been cut. But we kept him on because he did such amazing things for our culture, because he was so likable. He was incredibly funny. He was an unbelievable encourager. We kept him on just for the sake of, we need him to keep our sanity sometimes. Like, he would just say the right things at the right time when the team needed it, and we kept him on as an encourager. And that was an important part of what I consider our development into a winning team, to have somebody like that, be there for us. That wasn't the best player. He very rarely played, but he did such good things for the culture. And to be able to, from an administrative standpoint, from the coaches and us as captains, to be able to say, we need to keep this guy on the team, was really cool, because a lot of, one of the main things in leadership is putting your ego aside. And so for us to put the ego aside and say, we need this for the benefit of everybody else, whether sometimes we like it or not, we got to do it. And so we kept him on, and I love him to death for it.
That's awesome. And then we hear that term a lot, and we may not realize it, is when we hear, especially in professional sports, they talk about, the veteran who they keep on the team because they're the locker room guy or the locker room woman. And that's for exactly what you said. It's for a culture. Maybe they're not going to get as much playing time as they did, maybe a few years ago, but they keep them around because of the presence that they create in the locker room in general.
That's exactly right.
So what are some components that make up a great leader?
So I think, when you're talking about what makes a great leader, I think there's a few things. One, you're going to have empathy. You're definitely going to have empathy. You got to really understand the people that you're leading, whether you're walking into I always used to do this when I would be walking around in the locker room. I would be trying to think about, what are my players feeling right now, and try and connect with them through just the energy that was in the locker room, being able to understand, talk to them, understanding their side, because there's so many times that people are going to come up and, to you for a situation because you built that trust, and you got to be empathetic to it. They don't want to be judged. You have to be that completely unbiased, non-judgmental view when they come to you. Obviously, just being able to put others before yourself, which kind of goes together, and be that genuine influence, which is a term I talk about a lot. I think there is a form of sociability that goes with that. You got to be able to be social with everyone, from the best players all the way down to the players that aren't playing. Or, a lot of times what will happen is cliques form in bigger programs. And even in small programs, we saw it in ours. And so to be able to step away and say, this is my team, this is everybody, I'm a part of everyone's life here. I'm not in one group, I'm not in the other. And there were so many times where, and we talk about this in the book as well, like choosing not to go to like a party, or choosing not to, be invited to one certain clique's thing, because you have to, again, keep in mind of how the others are going to take a look at you and be able to, how are they going to interpret it and think of that way. And then there's definitely, I think you have to have some type of extra awareness. You obviously have to have, I think, some of the skills of your sport to be that, because you're looked at a beacon of a couple things, inspiration, passion, and then actual sport. What's your physical strengths, things like that. You're looked at as a beacon for that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's many, many more. That's like a whole nother interview right there. But that's like the quick version.
The list goes on and on, right?
Yeah, it really does, because there's so many aspects to it, and that's what's great about things like situational leadership is you get to tap into so many different things when it's needed, and each part of it makes up the complete, leadership role. So you can talk about leadership as a big L and a little L. You have your big L leadership, which is I'm standing in front of the team. We're, hoorah, let's go, let's get people pumped up. And then there's the little L, which is you're walking, through the hallway with your teammates, and he's like, Scott, why am I not starting? Why am I not starting? What's going on? And that's a small leadership moment. And a lot of those small L moments make up the complete leadership role. And so that's kind of how I view it.
Yeah, and I think maybe sometimes we forget that we are all leaders in our own unique way, and it's not, something that has to be on this grand scale, but all of us have the leadership skills inside of us, which is great why this book seems so great, because we can, assess it and tap into what our strengths are, and that's really what a leader is tapping into their strengths and using that to not only help themselves, but to, help and support others that surround them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Tap into the strengths, understand your weaknesses. I tell leaders to do an internal SWOT. So for the business people out there, it's strength, weakness, opportunity, and threats. So what strengths do I have? What weaknesses do I have? What are the opportunities for development? And what threats are there that can hinder my ability to develop and progress?
Got it. And so what are some of your leadership skills or emotional intelligence components that you're working on improving for yourself?
I think one of the, there's a few. So actually, probably I would say I'm always working on my self-actualization. And self-actualization is, when where you're going to, where you are, you've hit a point of like, this is what I was meant to do. And for me, I feel like that's always ever developing, because once I reach a point, I always say, okay, I did so much. What can I do more? And so for me, I'm kind of always striving towards that. I think one that I've always, impulse control is one of the ones I'm always working on, because I just I get really excited about things, and I'm like, time to go, we gotta go. And my wife wants to kill me sometimes. She's like, take a breath, slow it down, and so impulse control for sure is one. So one of the things I do, and I talk a lot about the mind, body, and spirit, especially as a martial artist, but a lot of this stuff always comes back to breath. Sometimes just taking a breath, and it's amazing what a few breaths can do to not only your perspective, but just something like impulse control, and just taking a moment and saying, okay, what's really the situation? You got excited, the endorphins are flowing, but let's calm that down and let's take a look at the facts of the situation. So impulse control is one that I'm always developing, and self-actualization, because I'm always striving.
So for the impulse control, is there a technique in your breathing? So would you say just a little quick tip for anybody who's watching, is it, a 3-second inhale, 3-second out, exhale? What is your recommendation, just kind of quick?
So if I'm in front of somebody, in a meeting, and they're telling me something, whether they're pitching me like an investment or whatever it is, usually I'll do 3 breaths, and I'll just do, in through the nose, out through the nose, try and focus on the belly a little bit if you can, without being obvious about it, because you're in a meeting. So just even that little bit can just slow your heart rate down and just kind of bring things back to perspective. If you have the time, if it's a phone meeting or something like that, and you're really excited, do maybe 6-second breaths. You repeat that, maybe 8 times. Close your eyes, things like that would be really good for it, and just slow your roll a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Is there an experience that you had as a student athlete in which your book might have been helpful or useful to you at that time?
Yeah, and I actually talk about it in the book, because I'm not embarrassed by it, because of what it showed me about leadership. When I was a freshman, I had the biggest ego. I came on to that team because I was going to be a freshman starter, and I was in a losing program, and I was told by the coach that I was going to be the guy that changed the team. And so I walked into training with the biggest ego, and I couldn't have gone about it in a worse way. I mean, I was yelling at people because they weren't as dedicated as I was. I was flipping out during games when we were making mistakes because I put myself on such a pedestal and such a level of competition and intensity is I did everything wrong. I don't think I came out of freshman year with one friend. And it was because I was so blinded by the result. You know, I wasn't understanding that the action we take and the leadership action we take in development and the personal relationships are all part of the process to the result. And so I was just focused on those numbers, and that's all that mattered to me. And then so I redshirted a year and then took a year to just like develop myself and understand. And then I came back and was handed a captain's band as a sophomore to a brand new team because they graduated a bunch of seniors, and I had to lead this team, people that didn't know me, that were like all freshmen, had no idea who I was, wasn't there the year before. The sophomores didn't know me from the year before, and I had to make a choice right then and there how I was going to do it. And I knew I was going to do the exact opposite of what I did my freshman year. And so it was a great learning experience. It was a tough learning experience because I wanted to win so bad, and I wanted the team to care as much as I cared. But I realized that wasn't going to happen overnight, and I knew it was going to be a process.
And how did you recognize that? Was that from the classes you were taking, or how were you able to recognize that?
Yeah, I was blessed enough to have an amazing academic mentor in the business program, and his business classes were more like leadership classes. We were studying leadership, you know, more than we were studying finance and accounting, and we were studying management and just looking at these great individuals who turned around companies that were just failing, and they did it in the most genuine, pure way. And I looked at that and I'm like, this is what I need to do. And then I started taking leadership programs right away at the school and just started learning as much as I could and went from there.
Wow, that's awesome. That's great because not all of us have that opportunity, because I can relate to your story as well. So the classes I was taking, they didn't have those concepts that I was learning. So I think that's great that you had that opportunity to learn that, you know, while you're experiencing being a student athlete, and you still had time to learn it and implement it as a student athlete instead of learning it after you were kind of done playing soccer. Going into your workshop, so you offer a variety of different college workshops, which everyone can check out at positivesportsleadership.com. But one of the ones that stood out to me was the career development for athletes. Yeah. And that's because you have a partnership with Athletes Equal Business. Yep. So can you share more about that particular program?
Yeah, so the career development program, essentially what we would do is this would be you're a senior in college. You're not going to be going on to play, you know, amateur, semi-pro, or professional sports. You're going to be entering in your career. And so what we do is we sit down together and we start with your resume, and we'll go over your resume and cater it to the student athlete resume, which is essentially, usually, depending on what program, you know, this is especially true in Division 1 and 2 schools, is a lot of the times it's just, here's my education and I'm a student athlete and maybe possibly one club on campus. So how do you take that information and make it, you know, stand out to an employer? And so we go through that process of the resume development. And then we have this incredible career development guide where we take your 4 years of being a student athlete and essentially create your brand. So we talk about what are your biggest accomplishments inside athletics, outside of athletics, what are the biggest hurdles you've ever faced? And then we start talking about what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses? And in that section, we start talking about how you tell your story through what we call SARS, situation, action, result. And then I always add an extra R onto it, so SAR, situation, action, result, relevance, you know. So when you're telling a story, oh man, well, I was a leader in college, and then here's the situation that happened, here's the action I took, here's the result because of it, here's why it's relevant to your organization and the position I'm going for. And so it becomes a great tool for the student athlete to use in telling their story as a student athlete and making that applicable to whatever position they're going for. And then in the guide, there's tons and tons of information. Once we go through the first like 5 pages, there's many different samples of cover letters, many different examples of resumes, follow-up letters and emails, how to write them, 75 ways to blow an interview, 50 ways to succeed. Like, I mean, it's an incredible tool, and it's a 30-page packet. We only fill out the first 4 or 5 pages, and the rest is just there for them, which is really great. And then what we do is with Athletes Equal Business is they work with Fortune 500 companies that actually do the job placement. So you can think of them as a little bit of a recruiting firm. So then once we go through the development process, we then work with one of the career coaches at Athletes Equal Business who's going to set them up with actual interviews for Fortune 500 companies.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you kind of get like that preparation that you're like you said, you're going to school, you're playing sports, and then all of a sudden, like, okay, I'm not going to play anymore after I finish school. It's like, what do I do? And you want that support. So it's kind of getting that support. And not only that, it's the networking. I think that sounds like the most important component of it. So that's awesome.
Yep, absolutely.
Great. And then you also have a workshop called Team Building Through Karate. So
yeah.
I know you're a 3rd degree black belt, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to be going for my 4th in November.
Okay, so you're really great at karate. And so how did you come up with this workshop incorporating karate? Are there karate movements being done in this workshop, or how does this all incorporate into working with student athletes?
So there's a few aspects to it. The first is, so when you talk about martial arts, you're talking about the mind, body, and spirit working together. And in my experience, and I've talked to other martial artists who've been in sports, every time my training in the martial arts took a seat on the bench to focus on my other sport, I didn't succeed as much as I would as if I was training at the same time. And so what I did is I started continuing my training during the soccer seasons, and my game completely elevated to a whole nother level. And so there's a lot of different reasons for that. And so the first one is the physical benefits of the martial arts. Actually, the way things are done in the martial arts, the movements, the stretching, those type of things create a physical benefit for you. Okay, the mind. You're focusing on one task. You're focusing on movements. You're connecting the mind and the body together, which is extremely important in athletics, because if you're not thinking about what you're doing, you're probably not going to do it. And then there's the spirit side of it, which is the energy side. So it's kind of the connection between it all. There's an absolute energy that comes to athletics. And when you take the martial arts, you focus so much on that energy development. We all have chi, this life force inside of us. So to be able to take that all together and everything you've learned and then put it into an athletic arena like soccer, football, something like that, the benefits are enormous. And so especially from a leadership standpoint too, when you take a look at some of the principles of the martial arts like modesty, courtesy, integrity, self-control, perseverance, indomitable spirit, those are things we talk about in this workshop that anybody can use to create that culture. And so for the team building, it's just really fun because they get the physical benefit of it. They're hitting pads, but then they're also doing self-defense with their teammate, which means they're learning to take care of their teammate. I mean, you're sitting there right in front of them. You're doing self-defense. You're touching each other. You're hitting each other. You're exchanging energy. You're becoming connected. And that's an important part of having a team culture, is being able to get people to care for each other. And it's a great intimate way and fun way for these guys to get the physical benefit, the mental focus of it all, and then the energy exchange, which is really important. So it just becomes a really fun workshop, and hopefully, the team walks out of there more connected. Their energy is in sync. You hear that a lot in athletics. Oh, we're in rhythm, or we're in sync. Well, what that means is the energy of everybody is in sync, and that energy is raising the team up to the next level. And so the martial arts is a great proven way for thousands of years, focusing on that energy and life force and being able to use that in an athletic arena.
That's awesome. I mean, I haven't heard of, integrating martial arts with, sports, like that we play. I haven't heard of that, but just you explaining it all makes sense with the mind, body, and spirit. And, it also makes me think about yoga. I mean, I'm not well versed in yoga, but it
Yep.
sounds like, they kind of incorporate the stretching and the mind and the body and the spirit as well, and why it could be important to incorporate those things at the same times while you're actually in your season, or of course out of your season as well.
Absolutely. And because I have that focus and responsibility to the people I'm teaching, like I do yoga, and that's an important part of my personal development, so I can have that extra awareness and center for the people I'm working with. And then I also just recently got certified as a Reiki practitioner, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but it's a Japanese art of healing and stress release, using energy for energy healing. So like, for example, like if you're an athlete and you get hurt, well, what's happening is there's what's called bioki, and that's negative energy in that area. And so I can use energy to help break up that negative energy that's in that area and promote healing. The big one is obviously stress release, emotional healing. That's all part of it. And again, that's all part of the mind, body, and spirit working together. And so for me, it was just another level of responsibility to the athletes that I work with.
That's awesome. Scott, you're full of such amazing, great things to help student athletes and people in general everywhere. I love everything that you're sharing, and that's awesome that you've made that commitment to yourself to incorporate those things and learn it, and want to make that better, not only for yourself, but for others as well. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any books that you recommend for student athletes that want to improve their leadership, their emotional intelligence skills?
Well, obviously my own first. Yeah, so my book, obviously, The Sports Leadership Guide, is a great one. If you're looking for just concrete, I want to know about leadership. I want to see what kind of leadership is out there and what kind of leader I want to be. Northhouse has a great book just called Leadership, and it's pretty much just like, here's what this leadership theory is. Here's case studies behind it where it's been used. Here's a lot of facts. So it's like a really good kind of factual leadership book. Then there's other great books if you want to learn kind of from like a ground up. It's a business book. It's called Plain Talk by Ken Iverson. That one was a big one in the beginning of my leadership journey, and what he did for his organization that was just failing so hard. And he essentially was like the father of decentralized management. And so taking some of those theories that he has in there and being able to apply it, definitely important. If you're focusing just on emotional intelligence, the EQ Edge, which is written by the founders of Multi Health Systems, that's an amazing book, and that's the one I use every time and recommend.
Awesome. Thank you. And then what are some ways to stay up to date with your workshops? How do we get your book? All those things. So what links, websites to keep us connected with you?
Yeah, so obviously www.positivesportsleadership.com. There's links in there to buy the book, which is just on Amazon. If you put Sports Leadership Guide or my name, Scott Cvetkovski, into Amazon, it comes up as the first one. All the workshops are usually on there. If you want to get at me at Facebook, it's just Positive Sports Leadership, easy to find. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Scott Cvet. It's my personal one because to me, this business is so personal. And so, people need to see me and know me through there.
And so thank you, Scott, for being on the Mind Right Game Tight show. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all the knowledge and, thinking outside the box ways that we can help, benefit ourselves not only in sports but in life as well, which is also just as important as well. So, we don't get to play sports forever, and we spend a lot more time in life than we do in sports. So you gave us a lot of great tools and things and skills that we can build to improve ourselves as human beings. So thank you for that. And then one last thing, just a question for you. You got to finish the sentence. I am grateful for.
I am grateful for every interaction that happens every day, because every interaction that happens, if you're aware enough, is there for a reason, and it can be a lesson learned or something gained. So every day that I step up and I'm alive, things happen, whether it's good or bad, I'm grateful for it because it just means that I'm living and I'm progressing.
Awesome. That's great. I agree. I'm grateful for connecting with you as well. So thank you so much, Scott. Thank you for joining us for the Mind Right Game Tight show, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle.